Hello and welcome. My name is Randy Bell, and I am the director of the Global Energy Center at the Atlantic Council. Thank you so much for joining us today for a fireside chat coming to you from the Lithuanian Embassy here in Washington, D.C. It is a pleasure to welcome Albinas Zananavičius, the Vice-Minister of the Lithuanian Ministry of Energy, for a really important discussion on the state of Lithuania's electricity market, the ongoing efforts to desynchronize from the Russian grid and join the European electricity network, and the potential issues with Rosatom's new nuclear power plant at Ostrovets in Belarus, about 25 miles from Lithuania's capital, Vilnius. We're going to begin today with a virtual keynote from Ambassador Richard Morningstar, the founding chairman of the Global Energy Center and the former U.S. ambassador to the EU. Then I'll moderate a fireside chat with Vice-Minister Zananavičius before we transition to audience Q&A. If you would like to ask a question during the Q&A, please make sure to use the Zoom Q&A function, and I'm monitoring that right here. So without any further ado, please let me pass it off to Ambassador Richard Morningstar.
Well, thank you very much, Randy, and it's a pleasure to be with all of you. I wish I were with you at the Lithuanian Embassy, but at least I'm happy to be with you virtually. And it's a pleasure for me to give some brief opening remarks and to welcome the Deputy Minister, Zananavičius, who has been such a good friend of the Atlantic Council and the Global Energy Center and is just a terrific spokesperson for Lithuania's position with respect to electricity markets and anything to do with energy. I might also say we value very much our partnership with Lithuania in working on Northeast energy issues, Northeast Europe energy issues, and Olga Kakova, who's off in Abu Dhabi right now, but I think is with us virtually, has been just terrific in coordinating with the embassy that relationship. I think that there is no better time to be discussing the need for Baltic electricity integration with the European grid and the danger of the present dependence that Lithuania has, as well as other Baltic countries, on the Russian grid. And I would emphasize that I'm sure the Deputy Minister would also, that regional cooperation will be key to achieving this. I think there are three recent events that emphasize the importance of this issue. First, and maybe most generally, COP26 and the energy transition, and that emphasizes the opportunity for renewables to make a major contribution to the electricity market in Lithuania, which in itself will help reduce dependence that Lithuania presently has on the Russian grid. The second key point that has come up, or presently a big issue, is, of course, the European energy crisis, which has obviously greatly affected the price of gas. One can't say that Russia has caused that crisis, but they are certainly not being very helpful in mitigating the crisis and are clearly continuing to use energy as a weapon and how they're handling this. And I won't get into the details of Russia's attitude towards the price of energy and the supply of gas right now, because we're going to talk more about the electricity market, but it's critically important, and I think the Deputy Minister, I'm sure, has some views on that. But it also demonstrates, apart from the price of gas, it demonstrates the danger of being dependent on the Russian grid, because Russia has no compunction about using energy to create leverage and could very well do so on countries that are dependent on it for its electricity. The third issue that's presently at the forefront are the tensions with Belarus, which have only increased in the past few weeks. The migration crisis with respect to Poland, threats by Belarus to cut off supplies of Russian gas to Europe, which I will say Putin has said won't happen, but still making those kinds of threats. And, and what it shows is that the Ostrovets nuclear station, which is such a huge concern for Lithuania, is a critically important issue, and that Ostrovets can lead to the increasing combined pressure between Russia and Belarus to leverage Lithuania and create potential risk to the electricity supply and create political pressure on Lithuania. So I think that these are really important issues to discuss. I think from the standpoint of Lithuania, and Deputy Minister, we've talked about this before, the issues with respect to the electricity market are even more of concern to Lithuania than the supply of gas, where you do have some alternatives at this point. Obviously also an issue. But clearly a very critical issue for you and for other Baltic countries. And why don't I leave it at that, Randy, and turn it back to you so that everybody can hear from the Deputy Minister.
Ambassador Morningstar, thank you so much. Thanks for joining us virtually, and wish that you could be here in Washington. Mr. Vice Minister, thank you so much for joining us, and glad that you're here in Washington for this conversation. And I understand you were at the basketball game last night. You just flew in yesterday, so I know this is a lot right up front, but we're glad that we can have this conversation. And we're going to start with a really pressing question, which is how has the ongoing energy crisis, which of course is particularly acute in Europe, but is global, affected Lithuania's plans for synchronization with the greater European grid? Is there an added urgency to decoupling with Russia and Belarus, or is Vilnius now seeking to move with greater caution? So how is that impacting your plans?
Yes, good afternoon, and first of all, thank you very much for having me here. I think that the current energy crisis was a very good wake-up call that we cannot be complacent. And in the case of Lithuania, I think we moved through this crisis quite successfully. We didn't have any thoughts that we could have gas shortages. Mm-hmm. And also in terms of electricity supplies, because we have already built interconnections with Poland, with Sweden. In our region, there is also interconnection between Estonia and Finland. Mm-hmm. We have kind of created already suitable alternatives for us to cover that energy shortage if it ever materializes. Mm-hmm. So I guess for us, it is a wake-up call and another reminder that we still have to do one homework, that we still have to synchronize with the Western European grid, and that we have to be, masters in our electricity system. So this is the underlying objective. We will be doing whatever it takes to keep the current extremely ambitious timeline. We cannot afford thinking that the process can be delayed. The only threat that we are seeing right now is that, due to global supply chain difficulties, some orders that our operators are making, they could be a little bit delayed, but we still have a comfortable margin of time to implement those projects. So I would say that energy crisis is a good wake-up call for us to speed up our efforts, and we have to redouble our efforts to desynchronize and synchronize in time by 2026, the beginning of 2026.
Got it. So going to stay on track, and let's hope that the supply chain issues don't slow that down. Now, towards those supply chain issues, I know that Lithuania is thinking about, has really ambitious renewable energy deployment goals. Now, putting aside any potential supply chain issues you might have with those components and whatnot, how does synchronization enable that renewable energy goal?
Well, I think first of all, the synchronization will give us stability and predictability. and will create a very good signal for developers of energy to start investing and to continue investing into our market. They will have a signal that this grid will be stable. It will be governed by European rules, which are one of the most open and liberal in the world, where everybody knows what are the rules and how they have to be implemented. So I think this will be the first very important signal. Secondly, of course, with the help of European Union, we are strengthening our electricity grid so that it becomes more capable integrating renewable resources. And what is also a positive news that some technologies have really reached the level that they are mature enough to be implemented even with the very limited help of public money, or in some cases, when it comes to onshore wind, they are already being developed on market conditions.
Right. Right, that's fantastic. Now, there's no chance of delay, right? But let's just say, would it delay at all adversely impact the climate goals, or do you think of that as separate? So do you think you're moving ahead with the renewable deployment just alongside the synchronization, or do you see those as intertwined in terms of how the planning works?
Well, they are definitely intertwined, but we also have to be extremely careful in terms of signals we are sending to the market. So we have to demonstrate that we are determined to synchronize on time, and this will in turn give market participants a signal that they can really develop their activities risk-free. So these processes are really linked together. And I think that for us, it is extremely important while developing our grid, not to forget that we have a huge plans to integrate different renewables into the grid. Some of technologies that we would plan to have are not developed yet. So, of course, we have to be also very open-minded in terms of grid development. But I think that process of synchronization, the preparation of synchronization with Western European grid is a healthy one, which also allows us to open our mind, also to have resources coming from European Union where we need them.
You mentioned technologies that still need to be developed. What are some of those that are on your agenda that you think you'll need in order to really decarbonize your grid?
Well, I think the biggest question today is hydrogen. And in the case of Lithuania, we are going to develop huge capacities of both onshore and offshore wind. And our ultimate objective is to be self-sufficient and even energy exporting country. So I guess that we still don't have the answer how we will balance those new huge offshore installations. And here I guess we should be, open-minded in terms of technologies that we will be employing. Of course, hydrogen is very popular nowadays to discuss, but the development of technology itself is still at a very early stage, so we cannot be sure that it will be available according to extremely ambitious timelines that we have in Lithuania, because our first offshore wind farm should be operational by year 2028.
Oh, wow.
And when it comes to the energy sector, this is a very short timeline, extremely ambitious one.
Yeah, and hydrogen, of course, you can produce hydrogen from renewable power, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done to get there, to make that work at scale. Pivoting a little bit away from the climate goals and more about the sort of political and energy relationships. So what does a Russia-Lithuania electricity relationship look like from 2025 and beyond? When you synchronize with the EU grid, what does that relationship look like with Russia? Will there be some interconnection, or will it be a sharp break?
I think it is quite obvious, and it was already confirmed at the level of heads of states and government back in 2009, that there should be no infrastructure linking Baltic states with the mainland Russia. So I think in that sense, the situation is pretty clear. When it comes to Kaliningrad region, I guess there could be a need to maintain some kind of infrastructure, but that will be only clear once we have a precise desynchronization plan.
Okay. How does the nuclear plant play into that, given the connectivity to Kaliningrad?
I think the nuclear power plant in Ostrovets, first of all, was a huge mistake because it was built in the wrong place. I mean, maybe some people were hoping that this power plant will export electricity into Lithuanian markets. But I think it was completely wrong to build it so close to the capital of Lithuania. And since Fukushima disaster, that was the only nuclear power plant built so close to a major capital. Of course, we will never accept that the place of Ostrovets nuclear power plant is a good one. And our ultimate goal is to close that nuclear power plant. And in any case, no Lithuanian money should be spent, financing that project. The political position is very clear. We have also implemented some technical measures preventing energy coming from Ostrovets nuclear power plant being traded on Lithuanian markets. Looking at the situation in a bit broader sense, if we ever allowed dumping of electricity in huge quantities from the Ostrovets nuclear power plant, that would have sent, first of all, very bad signal to those people who develop our renewable energy. And for us, renewable energy is also a political question because it's a question of our independence. So it's not only climate change objectives, it is also objectives of our freedom. So in any case, we cannot afford, dumping of Belarusian electricity on our market, and we did our homework to prevent that. I guess, if we move judiciously, we could mitigate, risks that are coming from Ostrovets nuclear power plant. If we are complacent and we would allow delays in our synchronization, then of course temptations in the region to get cheap electricity from Ostrovets will only be increased, and that poses a huge risk also then to synchronization process itself.
Got it. If you're out in the audience, you have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A function now. We'll get to them as they come in. And actually, as I'm saying that, we do have one that came in that's interesting. A Baltic power plant has been, this is coming from Steve Shapiro. A Baltic power plant has been under discussion since joining the EU and shutting down the old plant. Russia's done its best to prevent such a plan. The West doesn't see financing it as a national security matter, but an economic one, hence it's not attractive. What is the state of play here? And it's so it meant, and it's a nuclear plant, a Baltic nuclear plant.
Baltic nuclear plant in Kaliningrad.
Yeah, is that so? This is the Baltic nuclear power plant been under discussion since joining the EU.
Okay.
Yeah.
We had a plan once Ignalina nuclear power plant, old one in Lithuania, had to be closed, to build a new one based on Western technology. We went quite far in discussing the construction of that power plant. Unfortunately, we also had a referendum in Lithuania, which basically was the will of people was expressed that we don't need that one. So I think that original Baltic nuclear power plant is a thing of the past. And it's a thing of the past for quite good reason, because if we ever build that huge nuclear power plant, we wouldn't have enough connections to synchronize with the Western Europe. So on one hand, we would have large electricity generation in Lithuania. On the other hand, because of lack of necessary interconnections with the Western Europe, we wouldn't be able to synchronize. So it's a mixed story, but at the end, it is good that we were not able to build it.
Yeah. If you ever were to go that route, the small modular reactor might be a better solution.
I think, well, we have to bear in mind, and I'm speaking absolutely theoretically, but in any case, if Lithuania wanted to develop small modular reactor, we would be few steps ahead of competitors because we have excellent site for a nuclear power plant, the new one. We have enough water there. We have expertise in how to deal with nuclear. We have excellent nuclear regulator in Lithuania. And we also have a problem of disposing of old Ignalina nuclear power plant waste. So additionally, to put small amount of waste from modular reactor, that would have not very big additional cost for us. So I mean, in terms of competitiveness, we would be a perfect country to contemplate about building SMR. We are not there yet.
Right. Really interesting. Let's watch this space. Maybe let's have this conversation in a couple of years. So back to desynchronization. Is there anything that Moscow could say that would slow down the process, particularly with regards to Kaliningrad? Is there anything that could slow it down, or is this just full steam ahead no matter what?
I think this question should be put to Moscow. For us, we are always arguing that our divorce from the Russian electricity grid should happen in an orderly manner. It is our absolute preference that we had agreed scenario of desynchronization. And that's why we feel that this discussion on desynchronization should happen well before the actual date of synchronization with the Western European grids, so that we can prepare, so that we can have thorough discussion with Russia and Belarus how to do that technically. Because it is in nobody's interest to create additional troubles, but at the same time, we should not forget that it is a sovereign decision of Baltic states to desynchronize. And we have to be ready to embrace into discussion with Russia, and we have to be ready technically for synchronization by the end of 2025.
Right. Okay, another question from the audience, this one from Atlantic Council Senior Fellow Bob Eichord. And again, towards nuclear, lots of questions about nuclear. How is Lithuania looking at Poland's plans for major nuclear complex development? And do you see this baseload capacity as a way of complementing Lithuania's offshore wind in the longer term?
Well, I think we are not against nuclear energy as such. We used to be a nuclear country, nuclear energy producing country, and we had the highest nuclear energy penetration in the world. So I think while talking about nuclear, we pretty much know what we are talking about. I think for Poland, it is obvious that having such a big amount of coal-fired power, they need some replacement for that. One obvious candidate is natural gas, and we see that demand of natural gas in Poland is rising quite a bit. But it is also obvious that they will need other types of generation, and nuclear today is probably the most probable option, especially when they have a huge electricity system and they can quite easily integrate those big reactors, which would be rather problematic to Lithuania. And then, you know, there is a difference, a huge difference between the country in the European Union and Belarus, because we trust that Polish nuclear regulation will be up to date, that they will invest enough into workforce. And I think that the stability of Polish electricity system is also beneficial to the Baltic region as such.
Since we're talking about nuclear again, let's go back to Ostrovets. Is there any leverage that you have to pressure the decommissioning of that plant? Is there anything that Lithuania can do?
Well, it was obvious from the very beginning that Ostrovets was built for exports to the European Union. And the only route to do that exports was through Lithuania. And we did our homework to prevent exports of electricity from this nuclear power plant to the European Union. So I guess, I think financially, we did what is necessary to prevent financing of this project. Again, other leverages. We are working very hard with all the international conventions. We are working with International Atomic Energy Agency. And there, I will be probably politically incorrect, but we see that organization blindly promotes nuclear energy. And we have to be very careful, and we have to understand that nuclear energy should only thrive in good hands. And if ever wrong happens in Belarus, that will be probably the beginning of the end of the nuclear energy worldwide, because we had very difficult situation after Chernobyl, extremely difficult situation after Fukushima. And if we have another major disaster, then the whole sector could be damaged quite a bit. So I guess, I mean, we always have to recognize that we have a limited possibilities to influence the decisions of sovereign country, but no one has to have any doubt that we will do whatever it takes to stop the project and finally to decommission it one day, sooner rather than later.
Wow. Well, that's a big challenge, but you're up to it. So let's think about the Kaliningrad for a second. How do you expect the patchwork of grids to operate? Will you buy energy from Kaliningrad? Are you prepared? How do you see that working, particularly as Russia invested in gas-fired power plants there?
Well, I think Russia, first of all, invested into gas power plants in Kaliningrad because Kaliningrad has its own needs. We have no intentions to undermine any of our neighbors. We understand that the situation of Kaliningrad could be quite special one once we desynchronize. And I think well, with open mind, I think the European Union, the Baltics, will do things that are necessary to do the whole divorce process in an organized, orderly manner. Having said that, our long-term objective is to be self-sufficient in electric energy and even to become exporting country. Whether imports from Kaliningrad contribute to that goal, I do have some doubts.
Okay. Interesting. Okay, let's talk about more just the energy market in general. But specifically in Lithuania, the energy prices are high in comparison to the European average, and right now that's particularly challenging. Do you see synchronizing into the European market will help relieve those prices, or what else can you do in the short term before synchronization to alleviate some of the price challenge that you're seeing?
Well, I think it's not completely accurate that our energy prices are high compared to European average, because when it comes to energy supplies to households, we are always among 5 cheapest countries in the European Union. When it comes to gas supplies, once we built our FSRU facility independence, that brought real independence to Lithuanian gas sector. And today our price level correlates with the European level. In terms of electricity, we are still in the Nordic region where traditionally electricity prices are lower than in the mainland Europe. And we benefit quite a bit from that. We have interconnection with Sweden, which keeps our prices in check. Well, we did have some spikes this autumn, but our prices were still lower than in Germany. So I guess with the development of renewables, and also with our relentless strive to have competitive markets with the proper regulation, transparent one, we are heading to the situation that our price level will be really at the lower end and will be predictable and acceptable to business. So I think that Lithuanian energy sector is going in the right direction, providing energy reliably, but also at the affordable price. With synchronization, I see better opportunities for Lithuanian energy generators to participate in a larger market. So I think that will be really beneficial to us.
Got it. You mentioned the LNG terminal. How much of your natural gas will you import through that terminal?
Currently, 66% are coming through the terminal. Only 1/3 comes from Russia.
Got it. And will that increase, or do you have plans to? We have a question from Steve Shapiro in the audience asking: is it true that you'll import 100% of your gas needs through the terminal in 2022?
Well, we are importing 2/3 of our needs right now. The plans in the future, I mean, the game changer in the region is that next year we will be commissioning the gas interconnection between Lithuania and Poland. And we will start supplying northeastern part of Poland. And we know also about some projects of power generation, gas-fired power generation in that region. And we feel that we will be the most competitive supplier there. That will in turn allow to increase capacity utilization of our LNG terminal, which currently runs above 50%, and it's a good result if compared with the European average. But once interconnection with Poland is up and operational, I think we will see huge capacity utilization rise in LNG terminal, and I think we will only reinforce the success story that we have today.
Got it. Okay. Since you're here in Washington, let's talk about what the type of what partnership between Washington and Lithuania can do for energy security, for energy price, but also for helping to manage Ostrovets. How do you see the relationship here in Washington? And then also, while we're at it, Brussels as well.
Well, we always had very special relationship with Washington, and it is no doubt that we see United States as a guarantor of our security, including our energy security. What we are doing now, we are embracing into new cooperation in the fields of cybersecurity. I will be traveling to Denver tomorrow to have a discussion with the relevant laboratories of the Department of Energy. We will start cooperation on discussing transition of Lithuanian energy sector to 100% of renewables. We will employ some models that are developed in the United States. And we will also discuss climate adaptation of our critical infrastructure. So these are the areas where we will be cooperating with the United States Department of Energy and its laboratories. On the political field, we also see that United States are helping us in our discussion with different stakeholders and partners in the region. And I think in terms of our relationship with European Union and Brussels, we also see enormous support from the European Union towards our energy security. We also see billions of investment coming from Brussels into our critical infrastructure, into our electricity grid, into our gas grid. And I think what is also very helpful that the European regulation, the electricity market design, also helped us to make our energy sector competitive, transparent, and predictable. So that was, again, a signal for investors to come to Lithuania.
Fantastic. You mentioned cybersecurity, a really important question for the energy sector. We've seen cyber incidents in the United States take gasoline pipelines offline. There's been some risk. You hear about the entire power system being at risk. How do you see cybersecurity as an issue for your electricity system? Does the desynchronization play any role in your cyber calculations?
Well, I think we are one of the countries that is the most exposed in terms of cybersecurity, and we started taking it seriously already a long time ago. I think it's also a global issue because we see that most of those cyber threats are coming from some places in the world.
Mm-hmm.
I will not name them.
We all know where they're coming from.
So I guess international cooperation and pulling together best brains in the field of cybersecurity is necessary. And I always, remind myself that, democracy always wins against dictatorship. So we have to work with open mind together with our partners whom we can trust. And we have to build our own capacities to withstand any cyber attack so that we can defend ourselves and we can also pass knowledge to our partners. And here I should also make it very clear that we have extremely good cooperation in the Baltic region in terms of cybersecurity. We also have a strong partnership with Estonia, with Latvia. And I guess that the Baltic region is also in the forefront fighting cybercrime and other things. So my wish is that this cooperation continues also in the future and that United States, with their capacities, with their knowledge, plays a major role in the Baltics.
How do you see the change to a more renewable energy system with diffuse assets? How do you see that changing the cyber calculation? Does it make the system more secure or less secure?
I think that provides new challenges to the system because instead of having few power plants connected, we will have thousands of players. And in Lithuania, we also have this phenomenon of so-called prosumers, consumers that are also producing electricity. We will be implementing smart metering decisions. So in any case, there will be more and more electronics on our energy system, quite decentralized. That's why we have to, find the ways of putting things together so that the overall security level remains acceptable. At the same time, when we have this so many decentralized players, we have to be mindful on what technology they are using. And we also had some very high profile discussions about the technologies. And I should say that there is a strong preference that we employ technologies that are coming from reliable suppliers. This is also very important. So on one hand, the new technologies, computing, allowed us to manage the grid much more efficiently. On the other hand, it also poses certain threats, and with the increased number of players, that threat will be rising.
Okay, one final question, which is, since we're talking about cyber, but you also talked earlier about making your infrastructure more resilient against climate change. How do you think about building an electricity system that is resilient against all sorts of threats, that whether there's a cyber attack or an extreme weather event, that you build a system that can bounce back, that can continue to provide power, or can provide power quickly after being taken offline?
Well, I think first of all, we have to do a proper mapping on the places where the hazards are coming, where they are possible, and we have to think then whether the existing infrastructure should be moved, whether the existing infrastructure should be protected, or in the case we are making investments, we have to consider beforehand the best place where to put it. And that's why, expertise from the laboratories of the Department of Energy of the United States are really very important here. I guess we are one of the first countries that will be working together with the United States in this field. And I'm really looking forward to the time when we make really informed decisions also in terms of climate hazards, in terms of climate adaptation. This will be extremely important.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, we're almost out of time, and we have no more questions from the audience. Any last words, anything that we didn't talk about that you want to raise?
Well, I think we have always to remember that energy sector is really linked to the national security. So in any case, when we see short-term advantages, we have to think strategically, and it is much better to invest into sustainable future than to reap short-term benefits and suffer later. So these are leitmotifs that I'm always repeating, and I think this is the philosophy of the development of Lithuanian energy sector.
That's fantastic. What a great way to end, and what a great message, not just for Lithuania, but really something that everyone should be taking away as people think about the future of energy. Really appreciate you taking the time today to chat. Thank you all out there for joining today's discussion, and thank you especially to our host, the Lithuanian Embassy, our distinguished guest, Vice-Minister Zananavičius. It was really a pleasure, and we look forward to continuing to work with you, and we look forward to visiting you in Lithuania soon. Thank you, everyone, who helped put this event together today. Olga Kokova, Jordan Beckenstein, and Patty Ryan. And please check out the Atlantic Council website for future events on energy security, innovation, and the future of climate action. Thank you so much, and have a good rest of your day.